So thank you all for joining this Build Back Better panel today. I'm really pleased to have got such a distinguished group of industry leaders, really inspirational leaders, who we can discuss how we can build back better and why we should build back better. So we've got Steve Butler, who's the CEO of Hunter Southall Aspire, and Richard, CEO of Fidelity International, Mitesh Shesh, the CEO of Reddington, and Anna Maria Tuliak, a partner at Ludgate Search. So the pandemic has created a very strong change momentum, and with it an opportunity for our industry to build back better. But why do we need to do so? In terms of ESG, the industry, in my opinion, is below where we would expect our investee companies to be, particularly on the S. There are pre-existing challenges that face the industry, such as lower fees, rising costs, and changing regulation. This is all going to require transactional responses, such as new total operating models and process changes. The pandemic, however, brings a more uncertain and fluid outlook, which is going to require more resilience, agility, and innovation. These are the transformational elements of change, such as an inclusive culture. Also, the FCA demands that financial services companies have inclusive speak-up cultures. That means where there's a sense of belonging, where people feel valued and that they can bring their true selves and their voices to work. So in the words of McKinsey, I&D is an enabler of business performance and organisational health, and it contributes to the wider effort to revive economies and safeguard social cohesion. I think that the industry has had a good crisis and that businesses have become more humane and more humanised because of it. We moved rapidly into working from home, which meant we could stay in touch with our colleagues. It also meant that we could now see our colleagues inside their homes and often meet their children and their pets. So we've become, we get to know more about our colleagues than maybe we did even when we were sat next to them every day. And there's a more genuine focus on well-being. So when colleagues ask each other how they are, they genuinely want to know the answer, and colleagues feel more open about speaking if they're feeling less than at par. So this is a fantastic opportunity to accelerate and amplify the changes that are happening. So let's find out from our panel how to do this. So Steve, in the great financial crisis, our industry did not particularly focus on diversity and inclusion. They focused more on cost cutting, and diversity actually reversed. What needs to be different during this crisis?
Yeah, I think it was more than just cost saving. It was a very transactional form of leadership that we saw, where people kind of reverted to the simplest form of management, looked at efficiencies, reducing costs, and just stuck to what they knew. Now clearly, in times of recession, elements of that are necessary, but I think it's also quite important that as leaders we take an ambidextrous approach to leadership, and we introduce a transformational leadership into our toolkit, which makes us experimental, innovative, and flexible. And I think by combining these two management styles, we can meet the requirements of managing costs for our stakeholders, but more importantly, we can create the right balance in the workforce. And the right balance for us will mean creating an environment to attract and retain the right talent, fostering strong company loyalty, and working on the well-being of our employees. And all three of those things will ultimately drive operational efficiency. So from a leadership perspective, my proposal is that we just need to be more ambidextrous, which ultimately means being experimental and innovative.
Great. Is there anything else that anybody else would like to add to build on that, or got a different views? Don't worry if not, we've got lots of more questions to talk about.
I've always been a big fan of ambidextrous leadership that Steve talks about here, because I think we are, as leaders, challenged to be able to run cost-efficient, profitable organizations, and at the same time, you know, and doing that at pace, whilst also taking the time to listen, to empathize, to really understand the nature of change. And I know most leaders are constantly having to kind of switch between different types of meetings and challenges and situations, but at the highest level, being able to think about that as a left brain, right brain, or left hand, right hand, having to work together, I've always found quite a useful construct. So really nice to be reminded of that.
Right.
And Jane, if I may, if we're allowed to butt in, I hope that's all right.
Absolutely.
Not sure how you wanted to play this, but you know, thinking about that ambidextrous nature, and you know, there's a bit about when do you need to focus on one thing versus when do you focus on something else. I sort of bucket up the way you need to prioritize in telling people, you know, try and understand when you're working on something where absolute precision and right first time is really critical. And when you're on that kind of task and you're in that kind of process, if you're processing a trade, you don't want imagination, you want absolute ruthless accuracy. But there are other times and other tasks and other processes when it is about pace over perfection. It's iterate, fast, fail, create, iterate again, fast, fail, create, and finally you get to something which is much closer to perfection. And we need people actually to be able to work in both of those spheres. But the first is therefore understanding that the way you motivate employees for the first set of tasks and when you tell them they've done well or not done so well is maybe a little bit different to when you're motivating them and encouraging them on the second set of tasks. So sort of understanding as a leader, you have to be consistent within what it is that you are asking people to do and what they need to prioritize, and just be open and clear about that, I think is really important.
Yeah. Oh, great. No, thank you very much. So Anne, coming to you now, why has IND, why is it so important for Fidelity International, and how has it helped your business through this crisis so far?
Well, I try and avoid speaking about this as a crisis now, because it's simply a new normal. This is the world that we're in, and until we see a clear path out of it, we have to accept it's a new and different normal. And therefore, you know, I kind of now don't talk about it as a crisis. It's just the way we're all working at the moment, and you know, we kind of have to adjust our whole frame of reference around about it. But what has been clear, particularly when we were catapulted into this at you know, the early part of this year, you know, relatively quickly, is that if you have a bad culture, first and foremost, you cannot create the cohesion that was absolutely vital to getting people to pull together to help us navigate the very early part of this, when none of us had a clue what was going on or how and whether we could really adapt as organizations. We all had our business continuity plans, but nobody ever expected them to be stress tested in quite this way. So, you know, I think that was the first thing that became really clear. You had to lean into your culture. And if you did not have a good culture, it was much harder to create that sense of cohesion in the organization, which was really important to be able to frame imaginative and appropriate responses. Even something as simple as keeping the phone lines open. You needed people to be really quite heroic in that early period in order for that to be able to happen. But if we're all in this together, coming to the D&I point, we really need to make sure that nobody gets left behind. And that's one of the things that we're trying to think about and work really closely with. Everybody's individual circumstances are different. How can we as an organization, how can we as leaders shape what it is that different people might need based on where they're located, what their individual circumstances are, what have people gained from this new way of working, and what have they lost? And how do we help people adjust to both of those? And so, you know, I come back to the work that we did here last year, which we've lent on really heavily, which was, first of all, about really redefining our sense of purpose. What is it that we're all here for as an organization? And it's working together to build better financial futures. It's dead simple, applies everywhere around the world. That's what all of our teams do, from ops through to the front end. Then we thought about the values that underpin that, and they're dead simple again. It's integrity and trust. We have to trust people to behave with integrity, and we need to have integrity in order to earn trust. Trust isn't given, it's earned. We leaned really heavily on trust in the very early period, because suddenly we had to trust our people to continue to do the right thing in a very different set of circumstances. And boy, did they do that. It was brilliant. And so trust has been something that we learned on. And then the final piece was the behaviors. Again, we did work very early on when I came into Phil almost 2 years ago now around thinking about those behaviors. And again, we strip it back to a very simple set of behaviors: to be brave and bold, which is all about trying new things; to be curious, which is where the imagination and the creativity comes from; and to be compassionate and empathizing with the way that our clients' needs change, being empathetic to our colleagues' needs. And again, we've leaned on all of those as we've gone through the last year. And we've really, I think most of what we've tried to do this year has been built upon that bedrock. So I think, when you come and look specifically at the D&I piece, you need a foundational piece that sits underneath it, which you then touch again to talk about inclusivity and to talk about that sense of belonging. And I prefer to think about belonging rather than diversity or inclusion, because at the end of the day, everybody must feel that they have a home and they belong, and they are treated and valued equally within that community. And that sense of belonging, again, brings you back to cohesion, because we are all in it together and we've got that sense of belonging. So I mean, that's sort of how I think the whole D&I lens has, I have looked at it through what we've been through, and it's reiterated the importance of thinking about all of those different points of view to help us navigate this.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. Mitesh, what have you learnt during the crisis, and what are you doing differently in terms of your I&D strategy, or your belonging strategy, is it?
Yeah, I love how Anne framed it there. I think we're all learning, aren't we? Because as far as last I checked, none of us have done this before, or been through anything like this. So it would be ridiculous to come into it with a clear plan or to not be learning as we go along. But we learned so much, and much has been written about the need for leadership to be more visible or communicate frequently, whether that be written or verbal or through Q&As in the early stages. Being really transparent with our diaries so that people could see that we were balancing, kind of taking breaks and using different spaces to work, and kind of looking after ourselves, particularly as we observed that our people were just working right the way through from morning to night without breaks, and not recognizing the longer term toll on themselves. And that required us as leaders to role model and demonstrate. But I think the really important learnings have been around really listening to our people, because we can't see them. We can't just pick up the pulse in the office. And so you have to be going out of your way to listen to the line managers, and to really be listening to the end individuals, as Anne said, making sure no one's being left out. And that part of that is creating a safe space where people can speak up and say they're struggling or that they need help without feeling like they'll be judged or assessed in some way for that. But also acknowledging that how you view the world and the situation isn't how everyone else does. And that's probably one of the first, when we first started to go through this, you kind of assume we're all in this together. And then very, very quickly, we all realized, didn't we, that actually there are, hundreds of different experiences and individual stories and individual issues that people are facing. We just can't assume we know. And so much so that we really felt like we had to have sessions around the firm where we invited people, we called them perspective sessions, to get up and speak about their perspective. So what has this been like for them? Tell us your story, tell us how you're facing this, tell us what it's been like for you. And really starting from the top, allowing people to be vulnerable and be open and acknowledge the challenges they're facing. So tons of stuff learned. Maybe one of the most recent ones has been, we put a lot of effort on our junior staff assuming they'd be the ones that were struggling. But in the last few months, actually, it's been my senior team who are running on empty, looking after everyone else, that we've had to be much more mindful of and making sure that they're looked after. So we had our first executive committee virtual social game night, having not really, we've done it all across the firm, but we hadn't done it at the exco level just a couple of weeks ago. So what are we doing differently? One of the most important things were going into the year-end pay and promotion processes, as we are right now. We've been really mindful of wanting to make sure that team leaders are seeing the breadth of experiences and have, coming back to that point, compassion and empathy for the different situations as they think about how someone's performed and done. And so we held these perspective sessions kind of very specifically ahead of the pay promotion reviews to make sure that it was forefront of mind and that we were specifically acknowledging, and the situations people were in. And part of that has been learning to look after not just our people, but our clients and others too, because they're going through this for the first time as well. Specifically on I&D, I think the really important piece has been realizing as we listen that there's been different phases. And I think initially there was a lot of adjustment to, take just an example of parents and working parents. Initially it was dealing with the fact that everybody was at home and everybody was on the Wi-Fi. But more recently, since school opened again, it's been more about actually thinking about the timings of critical meetings, acknowledging that people may not be able to make the 8 a.m. call or the 5 p.m. wrap up or 6 p.m. wrap up that we've been doing and things like that. So we've just had to be adapting and being mindful of the feedback we're getting, not assuming we know, and allowing our kind of experience and lessons and approach to adapt based on real evidence and facts.
Brilliant. No, thank you. That's really helpful. Thank you. So Anna Maria, could you perhaps give us a couple of examples of where you're seeing your clients change and adapt their people strategies?
Sure. So I would say I observed 4 key people strategies evolving rapidly. Firstly, firms really embraced the flexible working as they were forced to adopt flexibility in location. And since I've been leading the diversity project Smart Working workstream since 2019, the key participant in the program we run with Timewise, Fidelity International, in fact, I would say role models flexible working best practice evolution really well. So whilst, and I'm sure Anne will be able to add to this later, but from what we have seen, whilst they were very good at flexing where people work for a number of years now, they really enhanced their commitment to flexibility in working hours and as well as contractual flexibility. They also looked at improving their internal and external comms around flexible working by forming a working group to look at the future of work that would also ensure that they're offering the kind of workplace people need, but also want to create in the long term. What they've also done is implemented a lot of line management training and specifically developing skills managing flexible working teams and also job design for part-time roles. And they're both crucial for implementing sustainable flexible working. We have also seen that the FCA was quick to provide clear guidelines on remote working. And in the webinar that we held this summer, they also quite openly committed to looking into flexible working as a part of their assessment of culture. So secondly, and as just confirmed by the leaders in this panel, we observed leaders becoming more inclusive in their approach, driving output and outcome-focused cultures. Thirdly, I would say that a lot of firms have refined their talent acquisition strategies for high potential and diverse talent. So leading firms have really recognized that the key to unlocking their business resilience is down to their talent. And finally, most of the firms have really stepped out their employee engagement strategies by running pulse surveys to identify what their employees need right now going through this crisis or sort of new normal, but also the culture they want to create and how they want to build back better. So I guess on that note, we recently ran an industry-wide smart working survey in partnership with Clearsight with over 500 participants. And I'm really delighted to report that over 80% of employees are currently feeling mentally and physically well, and also hold companies are able to maintain good ways of working despite the challenges and also locations of these people. Considering we are in the second wave of COVID infections, it was not surprising that half of respondents are not sure they will be able to meet their family obligations and feel they would be putting their family at risk by returning to workplace. But I guess most critically, this study revealed that over 70% of respondents feel less productive working in the workplace and don't see the office as their primary work location in the future. So I guess it is fair to conclude that companies which do not offer flexible working options post-COVID, and whilst they think about building back better, will suffer consequences such as difficulty in attracting and retaining talent, as well as negative diversity and environmental impacts, critical factors for firms looking to improve their ESG profile, Jane, as you said at the beginning.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. And Anne, the work that you're doing, Fidelity, on the future of work, is there anything there that you can sort of add to what's been said already about how it will?
Yeah, Anna Maria, thank you for those nice comments, by the way, which I was not at all expecting. So that was very lovely. So we've been working on the future of work for quite a long time. I mean, it's not been a COVID thing. It was very much a pre-COVID thing. And I think what we have seen, we're using a lot of pulse surveys. And one of the overwhelming, and we're doing this, and we've got more than 25 locations around the world. What we're seeing in those locations is, people's energy and people's sense of well-being goes up and down. It's not static. And so, in the most recent pulse survey that we've done, in 2/3 of location, people felt a bit less good when asked, how are you feeling today? But in 1/3 of locations, they felt better, and in some cases significantly better than in the previous survey. And I know that when we do the next one in 6 weeks or whatever it is, we'll see that changing again. And that puts, I think, a lot of pressure on, in particular, Mitesh, I think you mentioned this actually, the middle management team is, I think you said senior management, but actually I put it in that middle management team for us, is the one where an awful lot of the challenges have really they have been the real pressure point. And so as we evolve the future of work, we're looking particular at people who might not have been managing a team for a long period of time. They might not have decades of management experience to draw on. We've suddenly flipped them into going back to running, for example, those critical operational processes. And suddenly, instead of being able to control a team and control the efficiency and the precision of the team by having 10 people sitting a few meters away from you, suddenly everybody's spread in their own homes. And that creates a lot of stress and a lot of pressure on that middle manager. So one of the things we're thinking about in terms of how we evolve the future of work is not just thinking in terms of the flexibility that we give people both to shape when they work and when they come to the office and what they come to the office for, but it's thinking, do we really understand what we need to give as guidelines, as tools, as support, as reassurance to that middle management layer, which are kind of at the pointy end of responsibility of delivery on an awful lot of these things. So I think that's one of the biggest areas which we're thinking about now. And I don't pretend to have all the answers to that. I very definitely don't have all the answers to that, but it's where a lot of our focus of attention is at the moment, because I think if we get that right, it really sets us up well. If we don't get that right, we're bringing a lot of pressure into the organization, and that's not a good place. That's not a good thing, a good place to be for anybody.
Yeah. Oh. Brilliant, thank you. And
if I can add briefly just to what Anne was saying, that I think that line management function has been so squeezed and is so critical. When we ran our last workshop with line managers, and in a sense, it's so much easier to do virtually. And you know, the really clear message was a lot of training sometimes can go in one ear and out of the other and doesn't actually help habits. What they found really valuable, though, is hearing best practice from each other. And so we've made that a much more regular quarterly rhythm where we're drawing out the best practices that different line managers are doing and asking them to talk about it. And you know, what we're finding is other line managers are finding that a lot more useful than listening to me or the people team or otherwise, and are really finding that kind of valuable. And the second thing they've asked for is spaces where they can work with other line managers on specific issues they want to get better at. You know, maybe with somebody who, you know, with a mix of people with more experience and less experience, but a safe space and a smaller group where they can learn and share kind of experiences together. So I just thought I'd add that because I think it is the critical group for inclusion and diversity as much as for kind of helping navigate through this period.
Yeah, no, I absolutely understand, agree with that. It's so it's effectively creating cohorts that can support each other and mentor each other and share switch best practice. No, brilliant, thank you. So Mitesh, what about you've touched upon it already to some extent, but how about embedding what's happening now in terms of welfare and how you're looking after your team, any changes that you're making?
Yeah, it's been a real evolution, hasn't it? We started early on, I think a little bit like Anne did with our team in China, post-Chinese New Year. So that's when we first started really thinking about the impact of COVID and employee welfare. And then, you know, learning from that as we then in the UK prepared for remote working and having everybody work from home, making sure they had the right setup, whether that was their desks and screens and mice and keyboards and so on. All the way through to making sure that they were trained to be able to run video calls, particularly where we were doing that, you know, on key internal projects and with clients. So we had external trainers. And then I think we have a health committee that was initially meeting daily and has more recently been meeting weekly to kind of make the key trade-offs and decisions and kind of actively learning from what we're hearing. Sponsored by both the executive committee and the risk committee, so with the right representatives to make a call and be agile. We were talking to line managers, again, at least once a week, and encouraging them to have video on conversations with their people at least once a week again. So just trying to make sure that we were reaching everyone and we had a reasonable feedback loop within which we were hearing from everyone. We've slowed that down a bit as we've settled, and again, recognize that it may not be as necessary. The pulse surveys have continued, the Q&As with different cohorts of staff have continued, and that's been a really great way of them getting access to me and others in the management team and asking their questions, even if you're getting the same ones asked again and again. It's been thinking about holidays and how do we make sure that those who haven't been able to take enough holiday can roll holiday over into next year without causing a big problem kind of for planning for next year, whilst also encouraging them to take some holiday and some breaks over the course of the kind of year we're in. We've committed to giving 3 months notice to opening the office to make sure that if anybody wants to go back and live somewhere else or live somewhere away from the cities that we're in, that they have enough notice to be able to come back and, you know, find accommodation or otherwise. So a lot of it has been about even kind of signposting, you know, what may be happening. I think that's been an important part of employee welfare that we hadn't initially appreciated. There's been lots of specific issues we've had to deal with, you know, an employee stranded in Japan or people wanting to work from another country, or wanting to move back with parents or dealing with, you know, shared accommodation. The team socials have been really important. The recognition events have been really important to do virtually. And what's been brilliant is they've been fully attended. You know, everybody wants to see everyone else. And so, you know, you're trying to cram as many people as you can into these Zoom calls where you're celebrating someone's 5-year anniversary or, you know, some achievement, but also saying goodbye to people who are leaving the firm and doing that with dignity And again, those have been things that people have really looked forward to, hearing about these people's stories and how they've done and why they've done what they're doing, and sending them off with that. So there's been lots of things that I don't think it's embedded, because I'm struggling with embedding right now, because we're just dealing with so many, it's still very agile and changing. And I do agree that much of this will need embedding, and it's definitely forefront of mind, but it's having to be agile, as Steve said right at the beginning. Agile and adaptive has been so important. And so one example had been, we'd got a very clear message: people didn't want to go into the office, and were working fine from home. Yet, as Boris made his announcement about the 6 months over winter, and how this could be tougher for longer as we entered into phase 2, we had a real kind of reaction from a number of employees, maybe 15-20%, who said, "Oh, I didn't realize it would be that long." And I feel differently about this now, and actually I would really value some variety in my day, and I really do need somewhere to come once or twice or thrice a week. And so we've had to completely turn on its head our approach to then opening up an office and making sure that it is safe and compliant for people to work from. So lots of lessons there, and lots of experiences in ensuring employee welfare. And the last group I'll comment on is the interns through the summer, as well as our new graduates and apprentices who've started in recent months, and really going out of our way to commit to those programs, even though we couldn't do it face to face, and to figure it out, because we weren't sure how exactly it would work, but making sure that we were able to onboard remotely. And create a sense of community and belonging, even though they weren't going to see their colleagues maybe for months after they'd started.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Jane, there was just one point I wanted to kind of reinforce, listening to Anna and Mitesh. There's been a real positive on our kind of move online. I think looking back, pre-COVID, we were very guilty of having geographical cliques where certain projects or certain tasks only happened in certain locations because it was easy for it to happen. And certainly London was always viewed as the head office for exactly that reason. So, the move online has allowed our managers across the country to come together, has allowed project groups from across the country to come together, has allowed these much more mixed up social groups to come together. So if there's something that I'm very keen to hang on to when we come out the other side of this, is the inclusion that we've created through all of this is maintained. And I think people have been excluded in the past because of the hours they worked or the location they were in, and they're no longer excluded. So we've got to really work hard to keep that, I think.
Yeah, no, brilliant. No, thank you. Thanks, Steve. Now, Anna Maria, you've already talked about some of the working people practices, and you talked about the flexible working. But is there anything else that you wanted to add on to the flexible working best practices, and where you see more change needs to happen?
Yes, I guess it's as we are sort of adapting to the new normal and dealing with continuous uncertainty, I guess it's important to remember that flexible working really empowers individuals to work in the ways that are most productive for them and the business. So the emphasis is on the output rather than on location and working hours. So the main challenge for us right now is forced working from home. So working from home, it's only one form of flexibility, and it ideally should not be forced. So, and this is why, as it was discussed already, it's not working for everyone, and it's also not sustainable longer term. But I guess the current status quo is challenging. But what is really encouraging is the research that shows the majority of professionals in our industry are experiencing improved work-life balance, well-being, and also increased productivity. So I guess possibilities are endless of how we can use smart working as a powerful tool to build back better, but also create a more inclusive culture after the pandemic and after we don't have this added strain of a health crisis. So I guess there are a number of firms showing flexible working best practice, including firms represented at this panel. But I guess a further example I should mention is Schroders, which permanently embraced flexible working across its business, and also, I guess, really emphasized allowing individuals and teams to really decide when and how and where they work to best support clients and the firm. They've also emphasized the importance of face-to-face interaction for collaboration and innovation to support the hybrid model as optimal, which we also believe would be ideal, but we're slightly restricted right now. So I guess we just need to be thinking about what's the right thing to do longer term. I guess it's also important to highlight some of the smaller asset managers, such as Artemis, for example. So they've supported flexibility in location for a number of years, including their investment teams, which hasn't been the case across the industry. And in this crisis, they encourage staff to come to an arrangement with their manager to really strike a balance between work and family life, including caring responsibilities. But unfortunately, that's not the whole picture. We have been approached by a number of employees sharing stories on how their employers have denied the long-term flexible working requests across different functions, including investment teams. So we believe that more needs to be done. And I guess to really help with the best practice, we have recently published a Smart Working Manifesto for Change, outlining 5 key actions which we believe firms should take to really implement a more strategic and sustainable flexible working. And I guess some of the actions have already been discussed in terms of leaders leading and role modeling inclusive cultures and behaviors. Another really important piece to this is flexible working arrangements being reason neutral. So conversations should be held on how, not why, flexible working is facilitated. We also believe that flexibility should be designed in job as standard and also outlined at a point of hire, which we are forced to do right now. But I guess one of the biggest focuses are really line managers, and especially to add to Anne and Mitesh's point about the middle management. I think that the emphasis on really training them on these new ways of working, which we're really not used to in the past, and really building skills for flexible job design, because this is not something most of the line managers would have had experience with. And I guess finally, managers really taking a proactive approach to really reviewing flexible working arrangements on an ongoing basis and giving enough notice as well, which Mitesh has mentioned as well. I think that's key.
Great, no, thank you. And Steve, is there, in terms of your location strategy, your offices, you talked about the projects shifting and that they not having to be in London to do certain projects. Is there anything more that you'd like to add on what you're doing in terms of your office location strategy?
Yeah, I mean, we have 11 offices across the UK. You know, we've grown through acquisition and we've accumulated a number of offices along the way. So, you know, I've put a lot of thought into the strategy going forward. And there's a few things driving this. Firstly, our clients are saying, actually, although we liked you visiting us locally, now we've got Microsoft Teams, that works for us too. So the demand for local presence for meetings has kind of reduced. In speaking to our staff, the large proportion of them are saying, yeah, we want to come back to the office, but not all the time, only part of the time. So, you know, the knee-jerk reaction will be, well, actually, we don't need offices anymore. Let's kind of close all the offices. But there's obviously other things at play. You know, we've got, there is a need for collaboration and networking. We've got younger members of staff that do kind of need training and kind of mentoring. And we've got, you know, future graduates and future hires that we need to embed in the business. So we do need this hybrid model where we have working locations and the ability for people to work from home or in other locations if they want to. So my strategy now is obviously very dependent when leases come up. But I'm closing some of our smaller regional offices and creating some regional administration hubs. So future younger hires will be in the geographical regions of those regional hubs. Out in the more remote regions, individuals can work from home and come into these central hubs once or twice a week. So we think this hybrid model between the two will meet the needs of both our clients and our staff. What this will mean is a redesign of the offices that we've got. We will need more meeting space, more collaboration space, and less banks of desks. So some cost savings to be had by less offices, but some costs to be added in terms of refitting and designs.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all very, very much. I think just to recap, then the themes of the key words that I've heard are trust, creativity, listening, stories, compassion. And so if I can just finish by giving a call to action to people that are listening, the audience, is to seize this as an opportunity for change, a momentum for change, to use inclusion and diversity as an enabler to make a more resilient and adaptable industry, and one that's more closely aligned to all aspects of ESG. As we've heard today, we've heard great examples of CEOs who are championing this, but it's the responsibility of absolutely everybody who is during the conference to listen more and to be inclusivity role models, to be curious, to be compassionate, to be kind to their employees, the people who work for them, but also all of their colleagues. So thank you very, very much. I think it's been a very, very interesting. We've had a lot of great input from you. So thank you, all of you, for your time.